guys, Caleb here, back again with more Red Knot. This time we have In Darkness, Death by Dorothy and Thomas Hubler. Now this, I think, is about samurai in Japan, like feudal Japan. I'm not really sure because the authors are not Japanese sounding. This is the sequel to The Ghost in the Taikaido Inn and The Demon in the Tea House. And in case you missed it, it's a mystery. Winner of the Edgar Allan Poe Award. The cover is not really all that great. It's take 3 images and kind of lower the opacity of each of them, and then there's your cover, surrounded by a darkish border, so we don't have to fill the whole thing with clip art. To the back, murder, honor, justice. In the world of ninjas and the shogun, honor is everything. So when the samurai Lord Inaba is discovered murdered in his sleep while under the protection of the shogun, the ruler is honor-bound to find the killer. Desperate for justice, he turns to the famous Judge Oka, the Sherlock Holmes of the 18th century Japan, and his 14-year-old apprentice, Seikei? I think that's Seikei. Seikei, to investigate. Their one clue, a blood-stained origami butterfly. Determined to unmask the killer, Seikei embarks on an adventure filled with mysterious and deadly shape-shifting ninjas, vengeful peasants, and a killer who will stop at nothing to keep his true identity hidden. So I thought this was, a story about this Judge Oka dude. Why are we following Seikei? Why are we doing the psychic thing? Sidekick thing. I don't know. Adventure and honor in the land of ancient Japan will intrigue young readers who will find themselves fascinated. First rate, well plotted and fast-paced. A great read. Kirkus Reviews. Other books featuring Judge Oka and Seikei. The Ghost in the I suck at my Japanese. Tokaido Inn. The Demon in the Tea House. In case you missed it on the front cover, we're going to repeat it. So, I guess this is meant for children, or younger people than myself, but we shall see. Chapter 1. In Darkness, Death. It was the hour of the rat, so I'm guessing 1 o'clock. Throughout the castle only shadows moved. As the moon made its lonely journey across the night sky, dark shapes slid across floorboards, one step ahead of the light, and when one black form, quicker than the other shadows, slithered down the hallway, no guard sounded a challenge. Earlier that night, many guests had arrived for Lord Inaba's party, and extra servants had been hired. No one had paid particular attention to a round-bellied wine steward, who was somewhat clumsy, but seemed eager to please. He neglected no one in his efforts to keep the sake cups filled. Okay, all of this is in italics, with the exception of sake. Before I was really into the whole anime and manga thing and learning about Japan, I pretty much already knew what sake was. People who know nothing about Japan know what sake is. I don't know why this is not italicized in the middle of an entire italicized page. The sake cups filled, even pressing Lord Inaba's bodyguards to drink a little, though certainly not enough to affect their alertness. Now, however, the powder that the steward had slipped into the sake had enough time to take effect. Guards, guests, servants, family, and Lord Inaba himself all lay as peacefully unaware as the dead. Because peaceful. And it means you're unaware because, you're dead. You kind of don't give a shit anymore. It's not really about being unaware when you're dead. All except the shadow. Anyone who had been awake to see would have been surprised at how much more gracefully The round-bellied wine steward moved now. As he moved into the corridor that led to Lord Ingeborg's room, the floor sang. It did what? I guess they mean that it creaked. I don't know why we have to get fancy with our speech here, but apparently it's a thing. The shadow paid no attention, for no one but he could hear. 2 samurai, which again is not italicized, guards sat on the floor in front of Lord Ingeborg's door, their heads slumped down on their chests. The shadow touched each of them in turn, and whispered into their ears. Then he stepped between them, and drew a short sword from beneath his plain kimono. People know what samurai and kimonos are. You don't have to make them look special when you're writing. I know what a samurai is, even if I knew jack all about Japan. I know what a kimono is. You can stop now. Men like Lord Ingeborg had enemies. His door would be barred to prevent entry, so the shadow pierced the decorated paper that covered the door frame, drawing his sword down it with no more noise than a falcon makes descending on its prey. Which I'm sure if I was there when that happened, I would know what it sounds like when a falcon, goes after prey. He stepped nimbly through the sliced paper. The daimyo, I think I'm saying that right, the daimyo lord, lying on a large, thickly padded mat, did not stir. He had drunk many cups of sake that night, as his guests toasted his return to Edo. I'm not sure, but doesn't daimyo mean lord anyway? So you're calling him the Lord. I'm gonna look this up. Give me a second. Okay, I'm getting... In feudal Japan, one of the great lords who were vassals to the shogun. So yeah, we're pretty much saying Lord, or maybe Lord of Lords. I don't think that was a thing in Japan unless you happen to be the emperor or something. But anyway, the shadow wasted no time in carrying out his task. In a moment the smell of death was in the room. Because when you kill somebody, they pee and crap themselves, in case you didn't know. Wiping his blade on a corner of the sleeping mat, the shadow said a silent prayer to ward off Lord Ingeborg's angry spirit. Because, spirits can attack you after you kill them. Though, being ancient Japan, well, maybe not ancient Japan, feudal Japan, they probably believed in such things. The shadow untied his garment then, showing the source of his fat belly, unwrapping coils of rope. Wouldn't that hurt? 'Cause that's like hemp, like scratchy, itchy hemp tied around your stomach. Unwrapping coils of rope from around his waist, he stood, thinner now, obviously dumb shit, to tie one end to a lantern hook on the wall. He lowered the rest of the rope out the window. Climbing onto the window-sill, he looked back inside the room, now polluted by death. He shook his sleeve, and something fluttered out, landing on the floor near the widening pool of blood, and then he was gone. Scene change! Seikei wrinkled his nose. The coppery odor in the room brought back a disturbing memory. He smelled it before when he had witnessed the death of the kabuki actor Tomomi. Okay, now, you might not know what kabuki is. I could understand this being italicized, but, it doesn't look like you explain what that actually is aside from naming them as an actor. Give me a second, I'm gonna look it up. Okay, so I can't find what I'm looking for, but, basically, to my understanding, there's kabuki, and then there's the other one that means, that's for the other gender. But I don't remember what the name of that is. And then one's performed strictly by men, the other's performed strictly by women. Which means that you have men playing men and women's parts, and you have women playing women and men's parts, depending on which one you go and see. But they're both basically the same thing. It's just one is all male and the other is all female. I don't think they're both called kabuki. I don't remember that being a thing. Of course, Tomomi had welcomed his death, had in fact led Seikei on a long, carefully planned journey to see it. Well, that guy's a douchebag then. His death, the one that had taken place in his room, in this room, was different. Lord Inaba had not gone to sleep thinking that his throat would be slit in the night. He had guards throughout his castle to protect him from all harm. For some reason none of them had stopped the assassin from entering the room. In fact, no one had even seen him. That much Seikei had learned from his foster father, Judge Uka. Early that morning the judge had awakened Seikei. Seikei. I've been saying this guy's name wrong. I'll probably continue saying it wrong. I have a mission to perform, he said. That was all Seikei needed to know. He rose and dressed at once. The judge would not have awakened him unless he wanted Seikei to go along. And indeed, when Seikei went outside, he saw 2 horses already saddled and waiting. Seikei mounted his, pleased that he could now do so without needing a boost from Bunzo, the judge's devoted samurai retainer, who had been assigned the unenviable task of teaching Seikei the skills a samurai should possess. Seikei had never learned those skills before now, because he had unluckily been born the son of a wealthy merchant. No matter how prosperous merchants were, no matter how prosperous merchants were the lowest members of society, below artisans and craft workers, farmers, and of course samurai warriors, who stood highest of all. Yeah, this was a thing in Japan. It's called a caste system, where basically, if your family is, say, a farmer, it doesn't matter what you want, you're going to be a farmer. There's no way you can rise up in ranks, or technically go lower in rank. Though, I would say going lower in rank is possible, and I'm sure you could go higher in rank, but it'd be difficult. But basically, I think it was samurai, followed by the farmers and peasants, followed by artisans, and followed by merchants. Yeah. And then it depended on luck, I suppose, if you went higher or lower in that system. And of course samurai warriors, who stood highest of all. Thus it seemed to be Seikei's destiny to remain a merchant, for each person must accept the place his ancestors occupied, which again was the caste system. If your dad was a farmer, you'd be a farmer, and your kids would be farmers. And then your grandkids would be farmers, and your great-grandkids would be farmers, and so on down the line. But when Seikei had shown courage in helping to solve the mystery of the theft of a valuable jewel from an inn on the Tokaido road, Judge Oka had adopted him as his own son. It was a great honor to be accepted into a samurai family, and Seikei tried to be worthy of it. Sometimes he felt he was not succeeding. He doubted he could ever shoot an arrow as well as Bunzo or the judge, although on the few occasions Seikei had battled an opponent with a sword, he had not done badly. He could write verses well enough, but he found other samurai arts difficult, especially flower arranging. Was that a thing samurai did to be samurai? They learned flower arranging? Huh. I was not aware of this. Seikei's horsemanship had improved lately, somewhat earning him Bunzo's respect. You know, Bunzo had told him yesterday, I once thought we could lose you merely by putting you on the back of a strong horse, but now I see we will have to find some other way. Because he's a douche, I guess. As the judge emerged from the house and mounted his horse, more nimbly than anyone seeing his round heavy figure would have suspected. So he's fat, I see. His housekeeper, Noka, followed. She carried a black lacquer bento box. Why is bento italicized? It's pointless to italicize anything if you're not going to explain what it is. You can say, it doesn't. Okay, let me think of a better way to say this. It's okay to sprinkle your text with a bit of flavoring. For example, this book takes place in Japan even though it's written in English. So I can understand if people refer to, say, Judge Oka, this probably be below his station, I'm not really sure, but somebody I'm sure can correct me, like Judge Oka as Sama, Oka-sama. Like, if they start addressing him like that, I could understand. If you instead wanted to have everybody address him as Lord Oka, or apparently Judge Oka, that'd be fine too. You wouldn't need to introduce what San, Sama, Chan, Kun, and all that means. Because that would be a bunch of different honorifics that you would have to learn, so I could understand not introducing that. And of course, I mentioned before, Seikei, kimono, samurai. People who are not familiar with Japanese anything will know what those things are. They're not going to necessarily know what a bento box is. They're going to be like, what in the hell is that? So you need to explain that it's basically a lunchbox. It is a box filled with food. And okay, as I'm looking ahead, we apparently get a sort of explanation, but it needs to be a little more than that. Obviously, they would know what the bento box means when they get a bento box. Obviously, food's going to be in it. You don't need to guess. You don't need to take that moment to let your reader guess. Noka followed. She carried a black lacquer bento box. Seikei knew what was inside, food for the journey. Duh! As she handed it to him, he felt embarrassed. Isn't there one for the judge? Seikei asked. He had his breakfast already, said Noka, but you're going all the way to Edo, and I knew you'd be hungry. Seikei thanked her politely, glancing at the judge, who was trying to hide a smile, for some reason. Noka treated Seikei, whatever, as if he were a child. How is this being treated as a child? You didn't get to eat breakfast, so she's giving you food to eat when you're hungry enough to eat. That's not being treated as a child, like at all. A samurai should be willing to go for days without food. No? Train himself to endure any hardship in the service of his lord. Even so, that's not childish for her to give you a thing of food. The judge knew just what Seikei was thinking. If there is too much food in that box for you, he said, I will be glad to help you finish it. Seikei handed him the box, secretly hoping the judge wouldn't eat it all. They set off, then, letting the horses go at their own pace, for the ground was frozen and covered with a thin layer of snow. Shouldn't we have been aware of this before you started talking about all this? Like, the second you got outside, you should have told us that the place was frozen and snowy. It would take them most of the morning to travel from their home in the countryside to Edo, the city from which the shogun governed all of Japan. So you're not going to explain to the reader what a shogun is? Okay. A shogun, I think, is kind of like a governor. I'm not 100% sure. He often called on the judge to solve problems that no one else could. Recently, the judge had organized a system of fire brigades to protect the city against the huge blazes that in the past had burned out of control for days. Okay, sure. Maybe that's important later. I don't know. It seems random to just hand over that information. The judge's chief's duty, of course, was to help keep order by arresting criminals and determining the proper punishment for them. On more than one occasion he had used Seikei to gather information for him. Seikei hoped this would be one of those times. After returning the bento box to Seikei, there were still a few tasty pieces of eel and some rice in it. The judge started to explain. A messenger from the shogun arrived very early this morning. Yesterday Lord Inaba was slain by an assassin while he lay sleeping in his residence in Edo. Also, if samurai, according to you, are supposed to endure the hardship of starvation for days to prove his loyalty and service to the Lord, which is bullshit, by the way, but of course, in Japan it probably was a thing. Your adopted father, this Judge Oka guy, you've already explained to me that he's fat. He's clearly not starving here. So, if he doesn't give two shits about this so-called rule or idea, why should you? Seikei nearly gasped. Lord Inaba was one of the most powerful dynamos, or lords. Oh, now you explain this. Gee, thanks. This is like the second time we've encountered this word in the country. For an assassin to be able to get close to him was almost unthinkable. Seikei had many questions, but he knew better than to interrupt the judge. Of course, the judge continued, this would be a serious matter at any time, but it is particularly grave because Lord Inaba had just arrived in Edo for his required visit. Thus he was under the protection of the shogun. His death was a personal embarrassment to the shogun, and the fact that the assassin has escaped only makes it worse. Seikei understood. To prevent any of the powerful dynamos from plotting to overthrow him, the shogun required them to spend 1 year out of every 2 in Edo, where he could closely watch their activities. Because they're paranoid as fuck, and sometimes they were rightly so. The rule was popular with the city's merchants, who gained rich customers forced to buy from them. However, it meant that the shogun had to guarantee the safety of the dynamos, their families, and the samurai who served them. If a daimyo or any member of his household were harmed while living in Edo, the shogun would be disgraced unless he avenged the crime. That was the only way to preserve his honor, and as Seikei knew, to a samurai honor was more important than life itself, which is true. Seikei waited for the judge to provide more details about the assassination, but for a time they rode in silence, except for the sound of the horses' hooves. Snow began to fall, and Seikei imagined the two of them riding through a scene in a colorful print, like the ones he had seen for sale in Edo. Finally the judge remarked, "It is too bad that we could not examine the scene earlier. Lord Inaba was killed while he slept. By now his servants will have removed the body. That is unfortunate." Seikei knew that the judge's reputation was a brilliant Seikei knew that the judge's reputation as a brilliant investigator was well earned. People said he could tell a criminal just by looking at him. The judge once told Seikei that this wasn't true, but because people believed it, some criminals confessed as soon as they were brought into the judge's presence. Little lies never hurt anybody, I suppose. The judge had taught Seikei that the best method of catching a criminal was to notice things carefully and think about what they meant. A criminal disturbs the proper order of things, he said, like a stone that falls into a pond. If you follow the circles that ripple through the water, you will come back to the stone. Great analogy there. That was a simple explanation, but Seikei found that it was harder to do than it sounded. The judge had occasionally sent him to look for information that would help solve a crime, but Seikei had trouble determining what was useful and what was not. When they arrived at Lord Inaba's castle, they saw that it was now guarded by samurai, who wore garments decorated with hollylocks, the symbol of the Tokugawa family, whose members had held the post of shogun for more than a century. Seikei wondered where Lord Inaba's own guards had gone. Well, considering they would see themselves as failing in their duty, they have probably killed themselves, which is a thing that they do. It's called honorable suicide. He soon found out, after the shogun's guards let them enter the castle. An angry young samurai greeted them. Greeted was not the right word, for he displayed a profound lack of politeness. "Are you the judge who is supposed to find the criminal who did this?" he asked abruptly, without introducing himself. "You've taken your time getting here. I have sent 3 messengers to the shogun and received nothing but excuses." The judge bowed as if he hadn't noticed the man's rudeness. "I am Mocha," he said, "a judge in the service of the shogun. I extend the shogun's sincere regret at the death of Lord Inaba, your father." "How do you know this? Are you guessing?" The young man seemed a little surprised at being addressed in such a manner. He bowed in return, although still too abruptly. Seikei noticed, and said, "I am Yutaro, eldest son of the family Inaba." "May we see the room where your father was struck down?" asked the judge. "It is still unclean," replied Yutaro. "The priests have not yet come to perform the purification rites." The judge nodded. Seikei knew that this was good news to him. "We will risk it," he said. "Purification of what?" "Risking what? Please explain this. Again, if I have to guess what you're talking about, you're not doing a good job at writing." As Yutaro led them up a flight of stairs, the judge asked, "Did your father have any enemies?" "None at all," Yutaro answered quickly, too quickly to have thought about the question. It seemed to Seikei, yes, that's not his name. "This is the work of a thief, and the lazy guards are to blame. They claim they saw nothing." "I would like to question them," said the judge. Yutaro shrugged. "I ordered the shogun's men to take them away, for who could trust such bunglers? Perhaps they have been executed by now." The judge paused. "Do you suspect the guards of deliberately betraying your father?" Waving his hand, Yutaro said, "What does it matter? They failed in their duty. The reason does not concern me." They walked up several flights of stairs to reach Lord Inaba's room. It was on the top floor of the imposing castle. "Do you sleep here too?" asked the judge. "No," said Yutaro. "My father reserved this part of the castle for himself alone. My mother is dead." As they began to walk down the corridor toward the room where Lord Inaba had been killed, the floorboards squeaked loudly, so loudly that Seikei took a step back. "This is a nightingale floor," the judge explained. "The wooden planks are set in such a way that they sing whenever someone steps on them. It is meant to alert the guards that someone is approaching." "Little good it did," said Yutaro angrily. "Where are the guards?" asked the judge when they reached the door where the paper had been slit. "2 of them are stationed directly in front of this door," replied Yutaro. "So they could not have failed to see an intruder," the judge said. "Certainly not, Yutaro," the rude tone creeping into his voice again. "How could they have missed seeing someone enter?" the judge asked, turning to Seikei. Seikei knew that the judge wanted him to think of an answer. "Maybe they left their post," Seikei said, "to investigate a disturbance somewhere else?" The judge nodded. "Or they might have been asleep," Seikei suggested, although they would have to be sleeping very deeply, he thought. "Both of them?" Yutaro said sarcastically. The judge waved his hand to encourage Seikei to keep thinking. "Anything else?" Seikei frowned. The judge must see something he did not. What could it be? Then it came to him. It didn't seem possible, but the judge had once told him, "When we do not know the answer, we must consider all possibilities, no matter how unlikely." "Well," said Seikei, "he could have been invisible." Yutaro snorted with contempt. Seikei's face fell hot. The judge merely smiled and said, "That is indeed a possibility." He slid open the door. "Let us look further," he said. Yutaro did not follow them, but stood outside the corridor listening. The body had been removed, but the coppery blood scent lingered like faint incense. A dark stain on the floor stopped at the place where the sleeping mat had lain. That, too, was gone, probably to be burned. The blood itself would not be cleaned up until Shinto priests came to drive away the bad kami, or spirits. Kami can also mean God. Hare and crab, apparently. The judge pointed to the rope that led from the lantern hook to the window. At least we know how the assassin escaped. He did not fly away. Seikei wondered whether the judge was teasing him about his earlier suggestion, as if to reassure him. The judge went on, but he could have been invisible if he were a ninja. A ninja? When Seikei and his brothers had been very young, their mother used to frighten them when they misbehaved by telling them stories of the ninjas. They could come and go whenever they wished, because they had magic powers that they could use to make themselves invisible. Not true, by the way. It was more deception, really, and they were very clever. They came in the night to capture naughty children while they slept and punish them in ways too horrible to describe. Are there really such people as ninjas? Wouldn't you fucking know this? Being Japanese? Would you not know this? Seikei asked. Yes, most certainly there are, replied the judge. Look at the rope. It's made of silk. Oh! Okay, well, that makes a little more sense, I suppose. Because, yeah, I was imagining like a normal rope made out of hemp and shit, and I'm like, that would not be comfortable to, have wrapped around you to make you look fat. Just the sort of thing a ninja would use, light enough to be carried easily but strong enough to hold. Come see. Seikei joined the judge at the window and looked down. He felt dizzy at the thought of falling. You see, the judge said, the assassin would not have needed to put his full weight on the rope. He could have balanced his feet against the wall on the way down. Still, he could not have weighed as much as I do. The judge gave Seikei a glance. Seikei's stomach churned as he realized the judge might ask him to test the rope by climbing down it. Instead, the judge whispered, as if he didn't want Yutaro to hear from the corridor, have you noticed anything else that provides us with a clue as to the assassination's identity? Seikei examined the rope carefully. It was made of black silk. The knot that held it to the lantern hook was not unusual, just a secure knot of the kind anyone would use. He looked around the room. Had the assassin left any other trace of himself? Not the weapon he must have used to slit the dynamo's throat. Why are we suddenly using dynamo? Why not just use Lord? People aren't going to remember what that means. They're going to pause and be like, wait, I encountered that word before. Let me flip through all these pages I read to find it again. Like have a legend or something. But again, if your reader has to break concentration on the story to go find out what a word means, you're not a very good writer, and you need to go back and fix this. Seikei trained his eyes on the spot where the judge was looking. There was an outline on the floor, traced by the dry blood. Something had been there earlier, when the blood had flowed around it. Seikei bent to study its shape. A wing? He said, puzzled. We must talk to the servants who cleared the room, said the judge. Chapter 2. The Butterfly. There is a disadvantage to being feared, the judge had once told Seikei. People sometimes confess to crimes they did not commit. Why would anyone do that? Asked Seikei. They want to avoid being tortured, but you don't use torture to get people to confess, as far as you know. Seikei said the judge had often said that such methods were useless in finding the truth. Not necessarily. Unfortunately, replied the judge, they know that I can if I wish. It was apparent from the looks of the servants that they were thinking of torture, if not something worse. Yutaro, Lord Inaba's son, had done nothing to reassure them. After the judge asked to question the servants, Yutaro brought them together like a flock of chickens. They assembled in a room downstairs where there was a shrine to a Buddhist saint, with a candle burning in front of it. The servants huddled together as closely as possible, and when they saw the judge, with the 2 swords under his belt marking him as a samurai, they all dropped to their hands and knees, tangling their legs together in their haste. Seikei saw that there were 7 of them, 5 women and 2 men. "Look up, if you please," the judge told them. Reluctantly their eyes rose from the floor. "Which of you moved Lord Inaba's body from his room?" the judge asked. "We were ordered to do it," protested one of the men in a shrill voice. The other men nodded vigorously. "I understand," said the judge quietly. "When was this?" "Yesterday morning, after they found him dead," the man said. "What is your name?" asked the judge. The man looked around as if he were sorry he'd spoken. He bowed his head and murmured, "Dopo." "That's a terrible name." "Is that even a Japanese name, Dopo?" "Who was it that found Lord Inaba?" asked the judge. "One of the guards. It was their fault. We were all in our rooms asleep." The others nodded, some of them murmuring agreement. "Did anyone besides the guards enter the room before you moved the body?" The 2 men looked at each other, and Dopo finally spoke. "Just Lord Inaba," because he would now be Lord Inaba, since his dad's dead. The judge paused before saying, "The new Lord Inaba." "Yes, he is our lord now." Dopo glanced at Yutaro, who was standing to one side of the room. Seikei thought Yutaro seemed pleased that the servant referred to him that way, and of course that was just what Dopo had hoped to see. "Did you enter the room while the body was there?" the judge asked, directing his question at Yutaro. Seikei could see that the new Lord Inaba did not like being questioned in the same manner as his servants. But of course the judge represented the shogun, and he could in theory torture anyone to obtain a response. Even so, it took Yutaro a moment to answer. Seikei could see he was trying to think of what the best reply would be, instead of what the truth was. "I did," he said finally. The judge looked back at Dopo. "Did you see anything on the floor when you removed the body?" he asked. Dopo furrowed his brows. "The Lord was on the floor." "He was on a mat," corrected the judge. Dopo looked as if he'd been tricked. "Well then, the mat was on the floor. I noticed that." Sure you did, which is why you said he was on the floor." The judge glanced around at the others. "The mat has also been removed. Who took it?" "We were ordered to," said one of the women. "Yes, yes," the judge said impatiently. "I understand that. What is your name?" "Shiwo." She was middle-aged, and looked as if she had some authority in the household. Without being prompted, she went on. "We took the mat and burned it, for it was impure with the Lord's blood." "And the blood on the floor," the judge began. "We were waiting for the Shinto priest before we cleaned that up," said Shiwo. "But you showed up first." "So I did. When you took the mat away, did you notice anything else on the floor?" "Just the blood, as your lordship said." "You said we took the mat. Who else was with you?" "No one, Lord, only Hana." Shiwo gestured to a girl about 12 years old next to her. "She's a little slow," Shiwo said with a wink at the judge. "Doesn't know anything you might want to know." "Great way to put a little girl on the spot, dumbass." At the mention of her name, Hana looked terrified. Her eyes pinned on the judge. Couldn't have been any wider if she had been watching a dragon. The judge gave her a glance, thought for a moment, and then announced, "I would like everyone to come upstairs and show me exactly what you did in the room." He paused. "Except Hana, you may stay here." Taking Seikei by the arm, the judge spoke softly in his ear. "I want you to question Hana. She may have picked up whatever it was on the floor. I need to know what blah 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 blah. I need to know what it was." Seikei wanted to ask the judge how he should draw this information from a girl who looked too frightened to speak, but he realized he was supposed to find that out on his own. When the others had left, the girl knelt in a corner of the room as if she hoped Seikei wouldn't notice her. He went a little closer. "What kind of work do you do?" he asked. She looked as if she couldn't believe he was speaking to her. As he held her gaze, however, she said softly, "Whatever anybody wants. Shiwo's in charge of us. She tells me what to do." "And she told you to help her remove the mat from Lord Inaba's room?" "Yes. I was scared. I would never have dared to go there otherwise." "I believe you," Seikei said. Hana didn't seem to be the courageous type. "And I wouldn't have taken anything if I thought it was valuable," she added. You wouldn't?" Hana put her hand over her mouth as if she realized she'd said too much. Well, it probably wasn't valuable, said Seikei. I didn't think it was, Hana replied. And anyway, it was spoiled. Nobody would want it. That's what I thought. Nobody would even miss it. Shiwa would just have burned it if she'd seen it. Seikei tried to figure out how to get her to tell him just what it was. Yes, he said, but the judge noticed. Nothing escapes him. The girl was silent for a moment. Then a tear fell from her eye, cascading down her cheek. Then one from the other eye, followed by another and another. Seikei was alarmed, as if she had sprung a leak, and would soon engulf the room in tears. Apparently we don't handle crying girls well. Seikei was alarmed. I read that. She hung her head so he couldn't see her crying. If any of us are caught stealing, she said between sobs, we're immediately dismissed. And I have no place to go. My parents are dead, and my grandmother said I was very lucky to find a place in Lord Inaba's household. She's probably dead, too. After a little while, she quietened down. Are you finished crying? Seikei asked. She shook her head no. Look, I have an idea, he said. Give me what you picked up from the room, and I won't tell anyone. She gave Seikei a look of surprise. The tears on her cheeks still distressed him, but he tried to appear calm. You won't? She asked. Truly? Well, I'll have to tell the judge, he said, but... He stopped because she had started to cry again. He will punish me, I know, she sniffled. No, he won't. No, don't worry, said Seikei. He's really very kind. I know he'll forgive you. She looked into his eyes. You swear? She asked. On my honor as a samurai, he said, putting his hand on the wooden sword he carried under his obi. And we're not going to explain what an obi is. You're just going to be like, it's tucked into his obi. An obi is the belt that wraps around the kimono or yukata to hold it closed and together. Abruptly, she threw her arms around his knees. He looked around, fearing that someone would enter the room and see. Oh, shut up, you little dickbag. She's a girl hugging you, so shut the fuck up. Let go, now, he said. If you don't give me the thing before the judge returns, he may not forgive you. Oh, she said. She released him and reached inside her kimono, drawing something out. She opened her hand to reveal a butterfly. It was made of folded paper, crumpled now and partly stained with dark blood, but unmistakably it had been intended as a butterfly, for the red paper wings were painted with black spots, just like a real butterfly. I didn't think anybody would want it, Hana said in a small voice. It could help us find the person who killed Lord Inaba, said Seikei. Hana smiled as if she knew Seikei was trying to fool her. Oh, you'll never find him, she said. Why not? Because it was a ninja. That's what the servants all say. How do you know? Did anyone see him? Of course not. You can't see ninjas. That's how they know it was a ninja. Child logic. Seikei couldn't think of an answer to this, but he reminded himself that all possibilities must be considered. Why would a ninja want to kill Lord Inaba? He asked. Hana shrugged. Somebody must have paid him. Who would do that? I don't know. You're the judge's assistant, aren't you? Seikei was annoyed at himself. The judge had often told him, never let people you are questioning ask you the questions. Well, you already got what you want, so what does it matter now? She's a little kid. Before he could reply, however, the judge returned. He was by himself and gave Seikei a questioning look. Seikei held up the butterfly. Very good, said the judge. He returned to Hana. Thank you for saving this for us. I didn't think, she began. This didn't belong to Lord Inaba, did it? Asked the judge. Oh, no. Hana seemed horrified by the thought. I would never take anything that belonged to the Lord. Just so, said the judge. You may go now. She lost no time doing that, scrambling to her feet and backing out the doorway, while bowing many times at the judge. Seikei thought he himself received a grateful glance just before she disappeared. The judge took the paper butterfly from Seikei and turned it over in his hand. What does it mean? Said Seikei. It tells us who the assassin is, replied the judge. Chapter 3. The trail begins here. Seikei stared. Though he knew Judge Oka had great powers of deduction, he could hardly believe the judge had solved the case simply by looking at a paper butterfly. The judge saw Seki's confusion and smiled. "There is still much work to do before we apprehend the assassin," he said. "But who is he?" asked Seiki. "And, of course, I do not yet know his name," said the judge. "But as you know, once we understand a person's actions and motives, finding him is no more difficult than following the tracks of a deer in the forest. If we continue with persistence, eventually the deer will stop to rest, and we will catch him." Seiki thought it would be harder than that. "How did the butterfly tell you all this?" "Actually, the butterfly has even more secrets to tell us. But I was asking other questions while you were finding the butterfly. Since you were not present, I will explain." He stopped because Shiwo had appeared at the doorway. "Would your lordship care for something to eat?" she asked. "That would be most welcome," said the judge. "Can you bring trays to us here?" "Whatever you wish," she replied. And after she left, the judge told Seiki, "Pay attention to the quality of the food we are served." Seiki wondered if the judge were letting his love of food overshadow his interest in capturing the criminal. Immediately Seiki chided himself for thinking such a disloyal thought. "How is that disloyal? You already have established he likes to eat. He is a big person who likes to eat. I don't see how this has anything to do with loyalty." Again the judge smiled, and Seiki hung his head as if his foster father could indeed read his thoughts. "Do you recall," the judge asked, "when the new Lord Inaba, Utaro, said he thought the assassin was a thief?" "Yes," Seiki said, glad he had paid attention earlier. "Upstairs I asked him and the servants what had been stolen. They could not answer, that is, they could find nothing that was missing. The young lord suggested that the thief was frightened away before he could steal anything. Do you believe that?" Seiki thought rapidly. Everyone was asleep. No one even saw the assassin. He could not have been frightened away. "So it was," said the judge. "And what else did Utaro tell us that we must now reject?" This was a more difficult question. Seiki thought over what he remembered Utaro saying. Then it came to him that his father, the old Lord Inaba, had no enemies. The pleased look on the judge's face was Seiki's greatest reward. "Just so," said the judge. Shiwa appeared then, carrying a tray of food for the two of them. When she set it down, Seiki saw that it held only 2 small bowls of plain rice and a dish of seaweed with a little soy sauce sprinkled over it. There were also 2 cups of tea. Seiki's family had been tea merchants for 5 generations, and he could smell without tasting it that it was inferior tea. To be served such a meager meal in a lord's castle was almost insulting. Then Seiki realized that was what the judge had told him to notice. The judge made no comment on the food. He merely picked up his chopsticks and began to eat. When Shiwo had departed, however, Seiki asked, "Why are we being served this kind of food?" "Ordinarily," said the judge, "I would take it to mean we are not welcomed here." Seiki finished his bowl of rice quickly. Since he hadn't eaten much for breakfast, it took an effort for him to leave most of the seaweed for the judge. "I don't think the judge would mind. You should probably eat it. Of course, I don't like seaweed. I've tried that before, and it blah. Tastes like blah." After the judge put down the empty bowl, he folded his hands on his belly and closed his eyes. A look of satisfaction slowly crept over his face, as if he had just enjoyed a magnificent feast. Seiki knew there was nothing to do but wait. Bunzo had taught him that if he wanted time to pass quickly, it helped to concentrate on the sound. Seiki thought of a time when he had heard the geisha. Okay, people probably would know what a geisha is, but you still might want to sort of explain it. Ume singing. Thought of the time when he heard the geisha Ume singing. Just at the point where her voice was highest in a lovely melody, ellipses. But his mind kept wandering to other things. The butterfly, how did it tell the judge who the assassin was? Who was he anyway? An enemy of Lord Inaba's? What did the meal they'd been served have to do with... I don't know, that's pretty obvious that... I don't know why the book is trying to hint around this when anybody with the brain cells rubbed together would understand that the son was a dick. The son is telling the servants not to be hospitable to the guy who's supposed to solve his dad's murder. This guy is a dick in all ways. He apparently really doesn't give a shit about his dad dying. He's just doing it because, he's tokenly got to do it. It's suspicious. Especially since he's being so rude to another samurai. You don't do that in Japan. Especially during the feudal era. If you were a dick, people had a right to call you on being a dick. And if they killed you for being a dick, that was it. Because you got what you deserved in the eyes of everybody involved, because you were heavily rude to somebody who was of a higher rank. I am thinking, the judge said unexpectedly, his eyes still closed, of a wonderful meal I once had at the house of a man who loved food as much as I do. Have you ever tasted soba noodles with whipped mountain yam and quail eggs? No, answered Seikei. A pity. Then you would have something to think about after a meal like this one. You said the meal means we aren't welcome here, said Seikei. Does that mean we should leave? Not yet, replied the judge. I want to see how unwelcomed we are. He seemed to relax again, and Seikei knew there was more waiting to be done. Seikei closed his eyes and tried to think of a meal he had particularly liked. It didn't take him long. Okayu, rice porridge that his mother had often fixed. Eating okayu had always made Seikei feel secure, as if nothing bad could ever happen. But of course bad things did happen. Life with his old father had not been easy. His father, the one Seikei had been born with. No shit, Sherlock. You don't have to specify this, we know who you're talking about. Or you could just say his birth father, or Seikei's birth father. That would have also been good. Had always told Seikei how foolish he was, wishing to be a samurai. You know that is impossible. And even if it were possible, you would not like it. How would you know this? Father meant that the life of a samurai was much harder than that of a tea merchant. He was right. That was why merchants were so looked down upon. No, that's kind of not really why they were looked down upon. Exactly. It wasn't that their lives were easier. It was believed that they profited off the hard work of others. That being a merchant meant that they didn't do a useful job. So nobody liked them. Father did not see the point of practicing the many things a samurai must be skilled at. Besides archery, swordsmanship, and hand-to-hand combat, a samurai would know how to write poetry, arrange flowers in an artistic fashion, and even conduct a formal tea ceremony. Really? I thought that was just a geisha thing. Except for the tea ceremony, Father couldn't see how any of those skills helped you make money. Seikei found all those things difficult, it was true, except for writing poetry, which he had always done whenever Father did not notice. Sometimes he thought he would never master them. He had not even earned the right to carry the two steel swords, one long, one short, that only a samurai could wear. For now he had to be content with the wooden one. But as the judge had told him, if your heart is that of a samurai, a wooden sword is as mighty as a steel one. The door to the room opened, and Yutaro stood there. Have you seen everything you need to see? He asked. The judge opened his eyes slowly, as if Yutaro had awakened him from a nap. I have seen the assassin, he said. Yutaro looked stunned. He glanced around the room. Where is he? Has he come back? I should have said, I have seen what the assassin is like, replied the judge. It's nearly the same thing. Yutaro's face clouded. I expect more than that. he said. The Shogun told me he was sending the best investigator he had. If that is true, it is surprising anyone in Edo considers themselves safe. The judge bowed his head. We will try to do a little better, he said, turning to Seikei. He added, now is the time for us to leave. Yutaro escorted them to the castle entrance. Seikei's ears were burning. He could not understand why the judge allowed himself to be insulted in such a manner. Seikei could hardly restrain himself from drawing his wooden sword. It would be strong enough to break open Yutaro's skull. Outside, the judge said to Seikei, you are learning to control yourself, I see, but I could still feel your anger, and I suspect Yutaro could too. Weren't you angry? Seikei said. Seikei asked, should I have been? Yutaro insulted you. That was his intention, clearly. In my youth, I would have been tempted to draw my sword and see which of us was more skilled. After that, almost certainly one of us would have died. I am sure you would have not been the loser, possibly. It is unwise to assume that just because someone has no manners, he is an inferior swordsman as well. How did you come to that conclusion that was Seikei's thoughts? He said nothing of the such. In any case, if I defeated him, then I would have to report to the Shogun that I carried out his order to find the assassin of Lord Inaba by killing his son, the new Lord Inaba. The judge glanced at Seikei. What do you think the Shogun would ask me to do, then? Seikei didn't want to answer, but he had to. He would expect you to commit seppuku, to kill yourself, which is honorable suicide, so why they couldn't just say honorable suicide, I don't know. But, I don't understand this. Why would he tell you to kill yourself after you fought the new Lord Inaba? He was a douchebag to you, and as somebody of a higher rank, or I assume of a higher rank in this case since you are investigating on behalf of the Shogun, I don't see why he would tell you to kill yourself. From what I understand of samurai, there is no reason for you to do this, but whatever. And I would be grateful because he would be saving me from the disgrace of doing anything that foolish again. But still, Seikei protested, your honor as a samurai. If you think your honor demands that you kill every dog who barks at you, the judge said, cutting him off, you will only find yourself spending all your time chasing dogs. There is no honor in that. The judge led Seikei around to the side of Lord Inaba's castle. He pointed to the window high above, from which the assassin had lowered himself. It took a courageous man to climb down from that height, said the judge. It would be an honorable achievement to capture him. Seikei looked around the snow-covered ground. Only a few animal tracks were visible. The judge pointed to them. Those are the marks of a fox. Those are the marks a fox would make, he said. Yes, Seikei agreed. The snow must have continued to fall and covered up the murderer's footprints. Perhaps, said the judge, let us go see the guards who let him into Lord Inaba's room. They mounted their horses and rode toward the Shogun's palace. The ride was slow because the city streets, as always, were crowded. Samurai whose wraparound kosodes? What? Kosode. Kosodes. Were marked with the crests of the daimyos they served. You can just say lord at this point. They served, swaggered through the street, each one ready to assert the greatness of his lord above all others. There would have been continual bloody fights in the capital's roadways had it not been that the Shogun banned all combat inside the city. The penalty for violating this order was death. Several times passing, samurai glanced furtively at the judge. The chrysanthemum crest on his kosode, of course, marked him as one of the Shogun's officials. But his size was an indication to many that he was the famous Judge Oka. A few samurai even greeted him with a bow of respect, and shopkeepers who were in the doorways trying to attract customers bowed very low as he passed. Although none of these people paid any attention to Seikei, He took pride in the respect shown to his foster father. Suddenly Judge Oka reined in his horse. "Hi!" he shouted. Hi. That means yes. Why would you say hi? He shouted. Tatsuno! Seikei looked in the direction the judge was facing. The only person he saw was a thin, shabby-looking man in a plain brown kimono. As soon as the man heard the judge shout, he turned and slipped down the alley between two shops. "Go after him," the judge told Seikei. "I want to talk to him." Well, I'll keep reading it. I don't see any reason to stop. But it's really annoying to me that we don't take the time to clarify what some of the words mean. We just italicize them for really seeming like no reason other than, hey, it's a foreign word, let's italicize it, and not actually tell you what it is, except for the fact that we'll kind of tell you what it is, but not really. If you are probably a much younger person than I am, maybe late middle school, early high school, you'll probably like this. If not, well, maybe you got kids and they would like it. I mean, really, if you're younger than high school, I would say avoid this because it is not a book for you. But I could keep reading this and probably enjoy it. I mean, I like Japan and I like Japan things and I like reading, but it's just kind of annoying to me. It's simply written, but then it's also written in a way where things aren't explained, or when they are explained, they don't continue to use it in that manner. Like, okay, a bento box showed up. How many more bento boxes are going to show up in the story? Just that one? Then you really shouldn't have bothered telling me that was a bento box. You should have said, like, a packed lunch or something. Why use Diamo when we've been using Lord, and then why switch to strictly using Diamo instead of just Lord? That doesn't make any sense. Also, the book doesn't really help you make a distinction between what a Diamo is and what the Shogun is. To my understanding, I think during this time in Japan there was no emperor. I think the Shogun was the highest you could get to. And then everybody else was basically like governors. I think. I'm not sure. Anybody better with Japanese history can talk about that if they want to. But that's really my thoughts on it. And yeah, nothing serious or deep here. If you know some stuff about Japan already, this book might drive you a little bonkers when it pops up. But other than that, you probably will enjoy it if you are several years younger than myself. So, I'm Caleb, and this has been Read Not. Thank you for listening. Bye!